Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the inaugural Gala for American Statecraft. It's awesome to be among so many friends of American Moment.
This is, in a way, our third anniversary party. On February 24th, 2021, we launched this organization. We have not only existed for its own sake, but we have had the impact that we wanted to. It was a piece that Senator Vance wrote that gave us the idea for American Moment.
I'm very happy to have been part of the story in some small way, and I'm most of all just incredibly excited about the work that you guys are going to do. I think fundamentally, if we're going to win this debate about foreign policy realism, we're going to have to convince them that we're in a new world that's different from the old world.
We can no longer think just in terms of the West being the only game in town. There is simply no reason for us to basically be courting World War III with the Russians. This project to show American leadership and resolve has backfired. Seeking to weaken Russia, we weakened ourselves.
It's one thing to disagree. It's another thing to care so deeply about the problems of another country, because that means you're focusing less on the problems of your own country. So if you are getting teary-eyed about $61 billion to Ukraine, but you've never gotten teary-eyed about what's going on the border, you should get the hell out of the Republican Party, because we do not need you.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Sarab Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this week it's just me, but only for a little bit, because we're going to do something a little bit different this week. As many of you know, we recently hosted our first annual Gala for American Statecraft, where we had fantastic conversations with and speeches from some of the leading figures on the American right. We thought that for our podcast audience, which is scattered across the country, and of course not everyone can afford a $1,000 ticket to dinner, we would put those speeches out to you as a collated collection for this week's episode. We had on a couple of guests. First up, you will hear Senator J.D. Vance, founding board member of American Moment and the junior senator from the great state of Ohio, soon to be hopefully accompanied by Bernie Moreno as well. Senator Vance is obviously a core part of the story at American Moment, and we were honored to have him. He then helps welcome to stage David Sachs, the general partner and co-founder at Craft Ventures, part of the PayPal mafia, was head of Zenefits, Yammer, and has really become a clarion voice on foreign policy over these last few years. We were honored to have him speak at a foreign policy conference we did 2 years ago, and since then he's only ratcheted up his involvement. We honored him with the Third Rail Award, which was an award given to a philanthropist who has exhibited public courage in American life on some third rail issue. Foreign policy is the most third rail of third rail issues, and so we were honored to honor David and have him give a speech on his assessment of the war in Ukraine and where we go from here. It was called Biden's Big Blunder, and it was absolutely professorial, a ton of fun. Then we will go to Stephen K. Bannon, who keynoted the Patrons of American Statecraft conference. This was a donor conference we did subsequently to the gala, just for our biggest supporters, but he has a rousing message for our audience there, and we think it's always fun to listen to Uncle Steve, the honey badger, do his thing. And then we close out with some remarks from me the previous night and our good friend Blake Masters, who graciously offered the toast to American Moment. So a star-studded lineup, very much worth listening. This is not some phoned-in episode. We really thought that it was important for you guys to hear it. So we will go now to all of those guests.
And thanks for the welcoming party there. Some of you are wondering who those are. That's actually my legislative director and my communications director. They had a little too much to drink at the pre-party. There are so many good friends here. I saw Jack P., saw Blake Masters. I could sort of spend the entire speech talking about friends of mine who are here, but particularly to Saurabh and Nick, congratulations on what you guys have done, and thank you. It really is an amazing organization. It sort of started off with the basic idea of if we wanted to have a second Trump administration or any administration where we had people at the level of Capitol Hill, people in the administration who weren't complete traitors to the cause, what would you need to actually put that in place? And I think they've done that and so many other things to actually ensure that we have good people working at all levels of government, and they have they've done an incredible amount over a very brief period. So I'm very proud of you guys. I'm very happy to have been part of the story in some small way, and I'm most of all just incredibly excited about the work that you guys are going to do. I have the unfortunate and difficult task of leading up to David Sachs, who's one of my closest confidants in this crazy world of politics, and I think one of the smartest people who talks about American public policy and public affairs. So with that unenviable task, I'll try to do as much as I can to lead into David's remarks. I unfortunately, because after Saurabh scheduled this incredible thing, and I was planning to actually be here all night, the Trump campaign had decided to do a big fundraiser, and so I sort of am going from that event to this event and then back to that event, and so unfortunately I won't be able to stay. Now, I was thinking about staying at least to hear David's remarks, and then I talked to my staff about it, and they said it's probably not the worst thing for you to not be around when David gets up and speaks. So I suspect he's going to say some pretty wild and fun things and things that need to be said. Now, the one final introductory comment I'll make, and those of you who know me and know that of my many flaws, one of them is that I can be sometimes petty. I remember, when was the last time I was in an American Moment event? Probably 2 years ago. It was right before the Republican primary, I want to say, in 2022. And there were a lot of National Review types who were really mad at me at the time because I took the position that America should not fund the Ukraine war indefinitely. Hey guys, I was right, sorry. But I came here to D.C. to speak at the American Moment Gala at the time. I think it was maybe March of 2022. And I had all these sort of NRO types attacking me for daring to come to this conference. Shouldn't this guy be fundraising? Shouldn't this guy be doing important things back in the state of Ohio? And it was at that conference that David Sachs and I actually spent a lot of time talking about our shared vision of the Republican Party being a little bit more realist and a little less crazy on foreign policy. And it was, I think, at that event that David agreed not just to support me, but to support me in a very big way. And I guess the lesson that I take away from that is sometimes you don't always do everything that's practical. Sometimes you should actually do the things because you believe in them and you care about them, and the practicalities will work themselves out. And so, David, thanks for your friendship, thanks for your support, but most of all, thanks for your leadership, because the country has really needed it over the past couple of years. Now, I will say more about David and more about his views, but, those protesters, I just have to riff on this a little bit, because the thing that they said that I thought was really funny was he's in the top 20% of those who take fossil fuel donations. And I'm like, think about all the things that these people think is terrible about me, and that's what they chose to come here and protest? Not that I'm in the top 1%. Not anything about my views on Ukraine, not anything about my views on foreign policy or on the tech. No. I'm in the top 1/5 of people in Washington who take money from the tech industry. These people have to get better lines. And I guess my takeaway is we are blessed in our enemies, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to win because we're going up against people like that. So take some solace in that. So I want to just make a few observations. Those of you who know me know I tend to, especially when I'm among friends, and this does feel a little bit like a family reunion, I just sort of talk about what's on my mind. And there are a few things that are on my mind, a few things that I think are worth riffing on. The first is I had somebody in my office today I was talking to about this thing that increasingly bothers me, which is the concept that America is an idea. You think about this, it sort of sounds facially plausible, right? I mean, America does have these really incredible founding fathers. We have all these interesting philosophical principles that underlied the American Revolution and the American Constitution. Like, there is a great philosophical, political tradition at the heart of the United States of America. But America isn't an idea just because our framers had good ideas. America is a lot more than an idea, okay? And why do I think this matters? Well, one is, if you think that America is just an idea, and this is an observation that has been made by others, if you think America is just an idea, then anybody can become an American no matter where they are and no matter what their core purpose and no matter what they add to the American nation state as it exists. So if you were to ask yourself, and I say this, somebody who fell in love with and is married to the daughter of legal immigrants to this country, if you were to ask yourself who should come to the United States of America, you could ask yourself, well, do these people believe in the American idea? Or do you ask, do these people bring something that will enrich the American nation state? Of course you want to ask the second question, right? A lot of good people out there believe in American constitutional principles. That doesn't mean that we should then bring them into our country and invite them to become citizens. If we did that, we would be overrun, right? But the more that I think about this, the more that I can't get out of my head that there's even something more sinister about this concept of America as an idea, because there's a sort of inverse, there's a reverse of what I just said. If America's an idea, yes, anybody who believes in that idea should theoretically be entitled to the benefits of citizenship, and that's absurd. I think even our friends on the left would acknowledge that that logical conclusion takes you to some pretty crazy places. But the reverse of that is the people who don't share progressives' idea of America no longer belong here. And I think that's where it's darkest, and that's where it's most nefarious, and that's where we have to fight back against it. If your family fought in the Revolutionary War, if your family fought in the Civil War, if your grandparents stormed the beach at Normandy, you don't get kicked out of this country just because you don't believe in progressives' idea of America. It's ridiculous. And yet I think that this concept is at the heart of so much of what drives the modern American left. If you don't believe in what we believe in, you are no longer welcome as citizens in your own country. It's why I think, to sort of lead into something that I think David's probably going to talk about a little bit, it's why I think these people are so obsessed with Ukraine. Now, I was walking on Capitol Hill not too long ago, and I actually saw a house that had 3 separate flags outside of it, or 3 separate sort of totems. So one was a Ukraine flag, okay, and one was a Black Lives Matter flag, and then one was that sign that sort of says, in this house we believe that science is science, like a bunch of tautologies that nobody actually has thought about for a second, okay? And I sent that to a friend of mine, and he said, oh, great, it's the progressive Holy Trinity. And like, I thought about that a lot, actually, because there's really something to this idea that to be an American, to be a progressive, to sort of participate in the community these days, you have to believe a few things. And you have to sort of believe these particular totems of the modern American left. Now, of course, we can sort of criticize this stuff and say that it's all crazy, but it really is not a sort of belief set or a set of political ideas to these people. It is a core part of their identity. They've sort of forsaken their religion, and they've absorbed this new religion. And anybody who doesn't participate in that faith, anybody who doesn't agree with its tenets, is no longer a welcome part of the national community of this country. That's like a really crazy thing that has happened in just the last few years, and it's why I think the Ukraine war is so important to these guys. Now, I went to the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to sort of riff on this a little bit. And the Munich Security Conference is like, the lion's den, right? It was one of these things where I was sort of shocked that I was invited. I talked with my staff. I was like, I probably shouldn't go to this thing, right? And they're like, well, you'll be like the only person there who's saying the things that you say. I was like, yeah, okay, what the hell? I'll go to Munich. It's sort of like the Davos of national security world. So it's even worse. It's like Davos, but even worse. I go to this event, and it's sort of one of these really crazy things where you're sort of bumping into various parliamentary officials and generals and so forth. All these people who are sort of, really plugged into the national security apparatus of the United States and NATO and sort of all these Atlanticist institutions. And, I gained something that I didn't expect to gain. And it's not like understanding. I didn't go to Munich and come out and be like, oh, yeah, of course we should write another $61 billion check to Ukraine because, of course, we shouldn't because it's terrible. But the thing that I did gain was a certain sense of pity for some of my colleagues in the Senate who have made this their main project. And I have to be honest, I have never seen this level of emotional investment in an issue like I have seen with the Ukraine conflict. Now, I serve with a number of very good people I often disagree with on a whole host of issues. I have never seen one of my colleagues, male or female, cry about the border crisis that is ravaging this country, okay? And that's cool. I'm pretty cool with grown men not crying, especially in a particular setting. But, I've seen not one, not two, but three grown men cry about the importance of writing another $61 billion check to Ukraine. I've seen that just in the last few months. So these people wear their emotion on their sleeve. It is the most important thing that many of them have ever done in public service. And I have two thoughts about that. One less charitable. One thought about that is Laken Riley was murdered by an illegal immigrant, a person who shouldn't have been in this country, and if Biden had done his job, she would still be alive today. We have people in the state of Ohio who are dead from fentanyl that the Mexican drug cartels have brought into this country, and that's to say nothing about the decline of democratic power. When you import millions of people and assign congressional seats based on population, even the people who are here illegally, you destroy the democratic power of American citizens in their own country. So if you are getting teary-eyed about $61 billion to Ukraine, but you've never gotten teary-eyed about what's going on the border, you should get the hell out of the Republican Party because we do not need you. We do not need people who care so much more about another country than they do about their own citizens. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have disagreements about Ukraine. Obviously, we need to be a big tent party, and I'm the first to acknowledge not everybody agrees with my views. It's one thing to disagree. It's another thing to care so deeply about the problems of another country because that means you're focusing less on the problems of your own country. It is a real problem how invested these guys are in this issue. But here's the more charitable thing I'll say about it. Not that they're right, because they're not. The more charitable observation is that if you grew up as a baby boomer and your entire life's ambition was to be a congressman or a senator or a cabinet secretary or the vice president, sort of whatever your ambition was, okay, and you spent your life oriented towards accomplishing those things, for 30 years, from 1990 until, say, 2020, you basically ruled the world. Your economic ideas dominated the free trade regime of the rules-based international order. Now, it's destroyed a lot of factory jobs in the communities that I care about, and it made a lot of your buddies rich, but that was your deeply held belief. Your belief about America's global leadership, that was a core part of your identity. Who cares about the fact that it led to quagmire in Afghanistan, quagmire in Iraq, destroyed Syria, destroyed Lebanon? Set that to the side. This is the life project of an entire generation of American leaders. And what I saw in Munich is I saw people who were so thrilled to feel like they were getting the old crew back together. And I think fundamentally, if we're going to win this debate about foreign policy realism, we are not going to be able to convince these guys that their entire life's work led to disaster after disaster after disaster, even though I believe that it did. We're going to have to convince them that we're in a new world that's different from the old world. And that's true, by the way. And that, I think, is ultimately the pathway to winning the battle for foreign policy realism in the 21st century. Thanks. One other just final comment here, and then I'll say a couple of additional words about David, and then I'll introduce him. Is that right, or do you need me to? Do you want to introduce David, or do you want me to introduce David? Okay, great. I'll introduce David. Why the hell not, right? So, whether it's the Ukraine question, or whether it's how to bring manufacturing jobs back to our country, and by the way, these are related questions. because America's defense industrial capacity is radically weakened, and the Ukraine war has revealed that. It should have been obvious, but it's really revealed that. Like, whatever your issue is, if you go down the list of the Republican Party as it exists today, and this is something I didn't see, certainly in 2015 and 2016. You can run the tape. I was certainly critical of Donald Trump back then. But being in politics on the inside has made me realize how important it is that he won the nomination last night, officially. And I'm not just saying this because I assume, hopefully, you guys are all voting for Donald Trump, except for our friends outside. I'm sure that they'll be like, Donald Trump is in the 39th percentile of support of the fossil fuel industry. It would just be devastating to the poor guy. But I, on nearly every single issue that matters to those of us in this room, the Republican Party would have taken a massive step backwards if anybody but Donald Trump would have won the nomination. I cannot overstate that or overemphasize that. You hear people say the Republican Party is the party of workers. And look, that is true. Right? If you look at the trends in American politics, the people that I grew up around are much more likely to vote Republican now than they were 30 years ago, and the people who belong to country clubs are objectively much more likely to vote for Democrats. Now, we can argue about the political dynamics and how to sort of win in this new realigned world that we live in, which I think is still in the process of realigning. But on every single issue, from border security to what we do in Ukraine, to what we do with other foreign conflicts, to the importance of building a real economy, not just a finance and service economy, Donald Trump is the most important figure in the Republican Party today. And if he had lost, we would have taken a big step backwards. So I just want to make this point and look, the question of whether our vision of the Republican Party wins over the next generation is going to fundamentally, I think, depend on whether Trump is successful politically and then whether we can govern effectively after that, okay? So this organization is extremely, extremely important because if Trump wins office and we don't have the people to staff the administration with, that's not going to be ultimately, it'll be better than Joe Biden, certainly, but that is not going to be as good as it could be. If Trump wins re-election and we win a Senate majority, but the Senate is fighting him every single step of the way on his three biggest policy agendas, then we are going to continue to have this slow-burning Republican civil war. It's a disaster for our party. It's a disaster for our country. We need to win, ladies and gentlemen, and November gives us a very good opportunity to do exactly that.
Hopefully you enjoyed those remarks from J.D. We'll go now to David O. Sachs, the co-founder of Craft Ventures, member of the PayPal Mafia, head of Yammer, Zenefits, and so much more. A real clarion voice on foreign policy. Thank you, David, for speaking out over these last few years at great personal risk on such an important issue. This speech was really professorial, deeply researched. Highly recommend watching on YouTube if you can, because there were slides that came along with it. But we'll go now to David Sachs.
Ukraine is not our 51st state. It is not part of America. It is not even a treaty ally. The United States has other commitments all over the world. Our resources are not infinite. Woke cancellation tactics are being used to silence this discussion. How do we find a diplomatic solution to end this Ukraine war? So it's my obligation as an American citizen to speak out. So you're seeing more and more people speak out. Their only interest here is that they are concerned about America, and they do not see people in the foreign policy establishment and politicians speaking out the way they should be. And that includes the Republican Party, who frankly has completely dropped the ball on this issue.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am constitutionally averse to rubber chicken dinners. And so when we decided that we wanted to host something, it wasn't that we decided we wanted to host something. What we realized is that there is a unique category of philanthropists in this country, people who don't just donate their treasure, but take extraordinary risk unto themselves to speak out on controversial issues. It is not easy, if you are operating at the highest echelons of American business, to speak out on anything politically, but certainly not on the sacred third rails of American society. Foreign policy, especially in this day and age, is that most sacred third rail. So when it came time to decide what the inaugural Third Rail Award would be about and who it would be offered to, it was obvious to us instantaneously who the first recipient should be. Please welcome David Sachs.
Thank you, Saurabh, and thanks American Moment for giving me this award. The most amazing thing about that sizzle reel you guys put together is it managed to capture every hairstyle I've had in the last 2 years. I don't know how you did that, but you managed to somehow do that. Since I started speaking out on this issue a couple of years ago, a lot of people have asked, why do you care so much about it? And really, this just started as one of many issues we talk about on the All In Pod, which is a weekly pod I do. And before the war even started, when the issue started to come up in the press that there might be a war, it was so clear to me, so obvious, that the United States needed to diffuse the tensions by taking NATO expansion off the table. And when that didn't happen, when the administration actually rejected that and invented a new thing called the open door policy, in which they said they would never take NATO expansion off the table, it seemed so unbelievably reckless to me that I just started speaking out about it. And then at the same time, we had this incredible groupthink and sort of this intense stampede of everyone basically ignoring everything we had known about this conflict before it started and saying that we had to get deeply involved, and ignoring the obvious risk here of getting into a war with Russia, into World War III. So it all seems so crazy and reckless to me, and that's why I started talking about it. And I think that if more people in this town had been speaking out, then maybe there would have been less reason for me to do so, but it seemed like there weren't that many people doing it. And then I got such a hysterical reaction to it. There was such an intense meltdown to what I was saying that just kind of encouraged me to keep going. I'm just... I'm just kind of stupid that way. If I start getting trolled for saying it, it just makes me want to dig in and say it more. So in any event, that's kind of the prehistory of kind of how I got here. And then 2 years ago, at the beginning of the war, I guess Saurabh noticed that I was speaking out on this issue and invited me to participate in American Moment's foreign policy conference. And so as a kind of outsider, I gave this talk, which then got published in the American Conservative, and that's kind of what got me started on this whole road. So, Saurabh, thank you for that, although I don't know if I should be thanking you exactly. I guess the Third Rail Award implies I'm getting electrocuted. So I don't know if this was actually good for me, but nonetheless, thank you for getting me started on this journey. What I thought maybe I could do tonight was just kind of review where we are 2 years into this conflict, and I've called this talk Biden's Big Backfire. Seeking to weaken Russia, we weakened ourselves. Of course, it wasn't just Biden who promoted this policy. There's lots of people in this town who agreed with this policy, but since the president is principally responsible for foreign policy, I placed most of the blame on Biden. And I thought it was important to revisit this, again, 2 years after I originally gave my talk. The talk I gave 2 years ago was called "The State Department Failed to Prevent the War. Will it now prevent the peace?" I was very concerned that the Biden administration would pass up the opportunity to seek a diplomatic settlement of the war. And little did I know that at the very moment that I was giving that talk, there was in fact a peace agreement that was on the verge of being negotiated in Istanbul. And that draft agreement was signed by the parties in early of April 22. But as we now know, through revelations over the last 2 years, that deal was blocked by the West. And many people have said this. Naftali Bennett said it, the Turkish foreign minister said it, and Ukrainian Pravda, which is a pro-Ukraine publication, let the cat out of the bag that Boris Johnson had flown into Kiev to tell Zelensky, we don't want to make a deal with Putin, we want to pressure Putin. So this story now has become undeniable. That's why the Wall Street Journal just did a piece talking about how there was a peace deal available in Istanbul, but they called the terms punishing. So they've had to now acknowledge that we did deliberately pass up the opportunity for peace, but they've tried to say that the terms weren't good enough. In fact, the terms were favorable, and certainly more favorable than anything Ukraine's going to get now, and it would have avoided all of the destruction of this war. So even if you believe that the United States did nothing to provoke this war, even if you believe, and Biden specifically, even if you believe that it was okay for us to back a coup in Kiev in 2014, even if you believe that the Russians should have been just fine with the CIA setting up, a dozen secret bases on their border inside Ukraine, having a network of biolabs, and with the United States pushing relentlessly to try and bring Ukraine into NATO, even if you think that all of those things weren't a provocation, I still think that once Biden sabotaged the peace deal that was available there, he became a co-owner of this war. So like I say, it takes two to tango. Putin may have ordered the invasion, but Biden sabotaged the peace. And what I want to talk about is Biden's policy here of deliberately perpetuating this proxy war against Russia. Again, this was not something that fell into his lap as sort of a accidental thing that he didn't have anything to do with. This was a deliberate policy choice. And this policy choice, he, I think, obstinately doubled down on the fall of 2022 when Mark Milley said that we should negotiate. This is the high watermark for the Ukrainians. They've accomplished everything they possibly can on the battlefield. This is the time we should really make a deal. And I know that most of you think that Mark Milley, you just know Mark Milley as a DEI advocate. But in fact, he's actually Biden's chief military advisor, or was at this time being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And Biden, again, ignored this advice. Milley was sent to the woodshed. They told him to shut up. We're not making a deal. We're going to push on. We're going to fight this counteroffensive. And we know this policy is well on its way to backfiring massively. And it's backfired. I want to compare now. I want to take you back to the claims that Biden made 2 years ago at his State of the Union and what he set up was going to happen compared to what's actually happened. I know a lot of you agree with me on this, but hopefully I can I know a lot of you guys work in policy on Capitol Hill. Maybe I can give you some reminders and arguments about how this started and where we are now. Biden's first claim about his policy was economic. He claimed that the sanctions regime would crush the Russian economy, and this would force Russia out of the war and perhaps even precipitate regime change. There was a lot of talk in the early days of the war about a palace coup in Moscow, right? And we promoted this idea. We said that, we're going to seize the ill-gotten gains of the Russian oligarchs. The idea was very much to get the Russian elite, the Russian oligarchs, to turn on Putin, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to keep their riches. Similarly, we're going to crush their economy so that the people would rise up, they would depose Putin. This was the talk that was really in the air 2 years ago, a lot of giddy talk about regime change in Russia. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, went even further. She said, this is 6 months later, said that the Russian economy is in tatters. The Kremlin has put the Russian economy on the path of oblivion. Our sanctions are working. To say this 6 months by September of 2022 was really quite delusional, but I think many people, including the mainstream media, were still pushing this message. What we saw, in fact, is that the dislocation to Russia's economy was very short-lived. The ruble had a spike, but then it stabilized. And similarly, the Russian economy, after having a small blip in 2022, started performing very well again in 2023. The data from the IMF, which is shown on this chart, shows that the Russian economy actually outperformed the G7 economies in 2023, and they predict the same for 2024. So this idea that somehow we're going to crush the Russian economies completely backfired, didn't work at all. The reason it didn't work is because Russia simply found new trading partners. Large parts of the world did not buy into our narrative and our policy, and we're quite happy to keep buying Russian oil, Russian gas, Russian natural resources. It wasn't just autocracies, it was democracies like India that increased their trade, Brazil, Turkey, and other countries as well. And you can kind of see the transformation in the press coverage here. The Economist, which has been one of the most fervid supporters of the Ukraine war, was saying in 2022, Western sanctions will eventually impair Russia's economy. Last month they were saying, well, sanctions are not the way to fight Vladimir Putin. We have different ways of doing this. But the White House is still pushing this idea. Just a few weeks ago, they said they're going to impose a new regime of sanctions in honor of Alexei Navalny. And they haven't changed their speechwriters. They're still calling these the new crushing sanctions on Russia 2 years later. You would think they'd at least change up some of the lines they're using. Russia hasn't been impacted, but Europe has. They're the real victims of these sanctions. The German economy is in a serious recession right now. Their economy is based on the foundation of their economy was based on cheap Russian gas, creating industrial exports. This has really hurt their economy, and really the whole Eurozone has been in stagnation since this war started. As you might expect from that economic decline, what we're seeing is that the war is starting to destabilize European governments, just not Putin's. Already, we've seen, quote, far-right politicians win elections in the Netherlands, Slovakia, and Sweden. In Germany, the far-right party AfD has been surging, so they're actually talking about banning it. And everyone knows that Rishi Sunak is kind of dead man walking in the UK. And the media's cope on this is that the pro-Putin populist problem is somehow Putin has convinced the populace of Europe to be on his side. That's not what's happened. What's happened is that the population of Europe is realizing that this war is not in their interest, and they're turning against their governments who have supported it. So let me wrap up again, point number one here. The first big backfire of Biden's policy is that the economic war on Russia has hurt our European allies while the Russian economy actually does just fine. That brings me to military. The military part of the component of this war, the Biden administration believed and said that it could exhaust Russia and weaken Russia. This was the term that Lloyd Austin used at the very beginning of the war, is that we're going to weaken Russia so it can't invade any of its neighbors again. We're going to knock them out of the ranks of the great powers. This was the big claim of the administration. And frankly, I don't want to just bash on the Biden administration here. A lot of Republicans agreed that this idea of weakening Russia was a, quote, good deal for the U.S. A lot of our swamp senators said that this was either the government's number one priority, or Lindsey Graham said this is the best money the U.S. has ever spent, the best money ever. So a lot of Republicans bought into this idea that we were weakening Russia on the cheap because we didn't have to do any of the fighting. As long as the Ukrainians were doing all the fighting and dying, this was a great deal for the U.S. And the media really amplified this breathlessly. They were publishing claims like Putin was stripping air conditioning units and dishwashers and washing machines to get the chips out because he couldn't get any chips for his missiles, and the Russians were every month there was a new article about the Russians were about to run out of missiles, they were about to run out of artillery, and a lot of these stories came from leaks within the intelligence community. So it wasn't just the media doing this. This was, administration policy to create these stories. The reality soon came out, which is that Russian industrial production is massive. The Russian Federation inherited this huge war machine that existed in the Soviet Union, this huge armaments industry that's capable of producing huge amounts of artillery shells and tanks and planes, and even now drones is something. They're outproducing the Ukrainians 7-1 on drones. The latest cope is that somehow the Ukrainians are going to win the war with drones. The problem with that is the Russians have even more of them than the Ukrainians do. And I think one of the biggest learnings that I've had from the war that I've been most amazed by is that it's the West, in fact, that cannot keep up. It's not the Russians who can't keep up, it's the West. There were articles as late as fall of 2022 that came out that were talking about this fact, that the West was rapidly depleting its arsenal of 155 millimeter artillery shells. And even though there were some stories about this, this idea never really percolated the public debate or the public consciousness. In fact, when I started tweeting about this issue, that the U.S. was depleting its arsenals about a year ago, I was met with total hysteria and anger on Twitter, even though Pentagon officials had testified to this effect on Capitol Hill. And so you have to blame the media, the mainstream media a little bit, for not giving the story the attention it deserved, because if this had been taken into account in our policy, then Milley was right that we should have, that was the time to cut a deal, is when we were running low on munitions. And he was surely seeing this and taking it into account when he made his statement. So the fact that the media just hasn't really given this story, even though they covered it, the fact they didn't cover it as much as they should, I think, is a big failure of our discourse here in Washington. Another amazing fact, Russia has the advantage not just on quantity but on cost. This was a really interesting nugget in the New York Times. The cost to the United States of making an artillery shell is $5,000 to $6,000. For the Russians, it's only $600. Now, I remember at the beginning of the war, we were told that Russia was this corrupt kleptocracy, and they wouldn't be able to survive the war because all the kleptocrats would just steal all the money, and so if they appropriated more money to defense, it would just all be robbed. Well, if it turns out that our production, our defense industrial base is 10 times more inefficient, then what does that make us? This is a really scary thought that I think we still have to come to grips with as a country, and the legacy of this, I think, goes well beyond the Ukraine war. So what this means on the battlefield is the Russians currently have a 5-to-1 artillery advantage. This chart actually came from the Wall Street Journal. They finally got their heads wrapped around this. The Russians currently are expending about 10,000 artillery shells a day. The Ukrainians only about 2,000. The U.S. is only manufacturing about 1,000 shells a day. So they're only able to really use the shells as we produce them. Basically, they've run out. And this is having a huge impact on the battlefield. In addition to the Russian war production, the size of their military is getting bigger too. So with their casualty rates decreasing, you can see on the chart there, this is by Quincy, that when the Russians went into Ukraine in February of 2022, they did it with roughly 180,000 troops. By the end of 2023, they were up to around 350,000 troops, and the number that I've heard most recently from military channels that I trust is 600,000. About 10,000 young Russians are actually volunteering for the Russian military every week. This war is not unpopular in Russia. They believe Putin that the West is essentially attacking them through a proxy. And young Russians basically are rallying around the flag and they're signing up for the military. And now Russia is not sending them right into the war zone. They're putting them through at least 6 months of training. But what's happening is that the Russian military is getting bigger. It's getting more battle-hardened, more battle-tested. It's getting trained on how to defeat Western weapons. And you can see this is a chart from Mediazona, which is a BBC-related property. So this is basically British state media showing the weekly number of Russian casualties, and it's going down because the Russians are learning how to fight this kind of war and take fewer casualties over time. All of which is leading to horrific Ukrainian casualties. It's very hard to get exact numbers on this because the Ukrainian government hasn't been putting them out. Zelensky recently came out and said that only 31,000 Ukrainians had been killed. He was pretty much laughed off the internet right away for that. The number that I believe is that there's been at least 500,000 Ukrainian casualties, about half killed, half wounded, at least. Roughly 20,000 a month. This is what the military channels that I believe are basically saying. One of the most horrific images of this war are these videos that have been posted on X showing the miles and miles of fresh graveyards in Ukraine that have gotten so big that you can see them from space. It's really grisly and horrific what's been happening there. And of course, the reason why the Ukrainian government hasn't been putting out the numbers, there's a good reason for that, is because the numbers would be disastrous if they put them out. At the same time, the Ukrainian military can't really mobilize more, or at least it's extremely unpopular to do so. This mobilization bill has been kind of working its way through the Rada, where they're going to try and mobilize another 500,000 conscripts. It's very unpopular with the Ukrainian people. This is why it became actually a hot potato between Zelensky and Zaluzhny. Zelensky wanted Zaluzhny to go to the Rada, which is their parliament, and advocate for the bill. Zaluzhny refused to do it. And so it's very unclear that Zelensky's going to get this mobilization through. At the same time, you're seeing a lot of stories about military-age Ukrainians, men, who have the means, seeking to bribe their way out of the country. They don't want to serve if they don't have to. A lot of them have gone into hiding. And then we've seen these videos come out of Ukraine of these press gangs who are going around the streets, rounding people up and basically throwing them in the back of vans at gunpoint. There was a story I read about a man in his 50s went to go get a haircut, and he was rounded up by one of these press gangs, and he was on the front lines a week later. They're sending them to the front lines with barely any training at all. I think this is one of the most horrific aspects of American policy, is that because of our actions and this myth that somehow we're helping this voluntary Ukrainian effort, that thousands and thousands of Ukrainians who don't want to fight are being rounded up at gunpoint and sent to the front lines with little or no training, where they're being fed into the meat grinder. It's really, I think, one of the worst things that the U.S. has done. The entire blob basically bet big on this disastrous counteroffensive. You'll recall that former generals like Petraeus and Ben Hodges and the whole media, the mainstream media, fed this narrative that the Ukrainians were going to have this victorious counteroffensive, and this is what this was the sales pitch that they used to get that first $113 billion through Congress. You remember that? If they had told us this is the new baseline for basically a forever appropriation and a new forever war, nobody would have gone for it. But they told us that we were going to, by appropriating this $113 billion, that the Ukrainians were going to have this victorious counteroffensive, kick the Russians out of their territory. That did not work at all, but now they're back for more funding, and they will basically fund this as long as we allow them to. So in light of the failed counteroffensive, the goalposts keep moving. Biden was saying just a few months ago that Putin's already lost this war. Now he's saying that Ukraine is in dire straits and we can't let Putin win. We heard from Blinken last year that he was bragging about how much territory the Ukrainians had retaken. Now we hear from the New York Times, well, maybe territory is not that important. Ukraine doesn't need all of its territory to defeat Putin. Biden's kind of subtly pivoted the message from as long as it takes to as long as we can. And you're starting to see the goal or the objective of our support change. Originally, it was about winning. Then it became about stalemate, and now the word is survive. They're just trying to survive. And what's happening now, if you're following the conflict, is that it is not a stalemate. The Russians are really breaking through, and you're starting to see a blame game emerge in the West. It started in Ukraine with the battle between Zelensky and Zaluzhny. Then it spread to Europe. Macron and Schultz are basically not on speaking terms or openly having a spat. And you may have seen that Victoria Nuland just headed for the exits. I don't know if she knew. Yeah. It was very gracious of her to do that just in time for my talk. I really want to thank her for doing that. But yeah, when the architect of your policy basically is one of the rats who's jumping ship, that's never a good sign. So again, this is backfire number 2, is that Biden's proxy war is supposed to weaken Russia militarily. Instead, it's made Russia stronger in really every way militarily while depleting our own stockpiles. This is really a huge disaster for the United States. Third, and I'm going to finish up pretty quickly here, diplomatic. Biden said the war would show Western unity, resolve, and leadership. And these are the words he would always use, as unity, resolve. This shows American leadership. But in fact, the rest of the world has not come along for the ride on this. They do not agree with this view. And over time, more and more countries have been rejecting Biden's view. They see that the United States has been unreasonable in its unwillingness to negotiate and end this conflict. I don't know if you saw that Putin recently made a trip to the Middle East. He was warmly embraced by MBS in Saudi Arabia and MBZ in UAE. In fact, UAE basically threw a parade for Putin. It was like he was a conquering hero. They had a parade lining the street. They had fighter jets streaming the Russian colors. It was really quite extraordinary. And then basically the whole BRICS and Global South is not treating Putin as the pariah that Biden said he would be. Not at all. They've gradually, I think, become more disillusioned with American leadership. The sanctions regime we've placed on Russia has only made BRICS more popular because BRICS offers a way for countries to resist American sanctions. The nations of BRICS agree not to sanction each other. And so 5 more countries have joined BRICS, or now up to 10. And there's a huge waiting list of countries that want to join. And where this all leads is that BRICS is working on an alternative to the US dollar as a way of settling global trade. This won't be a currency that the man on the street uses, but they are looking to figure out a way to settle global trade without going through the US dollar complex. So they are committed to undermining the dollar status as the world reserve currency, which would really damage our standard of living in the United States when that happens. This isn't something that's going to happen in the next year or two, but on a decade-long time frame, this is a real risk that's been created by the war. If you don't think BRICS matters, I just want to make a quick point here that BRICS' GDP surpassed the G7 in purchasing power parity terms last year. So, we can no longer think just in terms of the West being the only game in town. The BRICS, the Global South, and so on, their economies collectively are bigger than the Western countries. Even liberal interventionists are noting what a disaster this is. Fiona Hill is a notorious Russia hawk who I think participated in the Trump impeachment. She basically said that Pax Americana is over, that Russia has cleverly exploited deep-seated international resistance to American leadership. So she's recognizing how the war has catalyzed this resistance. And Joseph Borrell, who is the EU foreign minister and who's a huge kind of hawk in line with the American view of the world, said that the era of Western dominance has indeed definitively ended. So somehow this project to show American leadership and resolve has backfired and led to, and somehow catalyzed resistance to American leadership all over the world. And I think this is Biden's big backfire number 3. And then finally, just on humanitarian grounds, Biden claimed, again in his State of the Union 2 years ago, that his policy would aid the Ukrainian people and help ease their suffering. And I think we can see from the casualties that has not happened. Recently, Quincy put out some stats. Ukraine's already lost a third of its population. The number has gone down from roughly 44 million to 28 million. Over 10 million refugees have fled the country. Basically, a lot of women and children have left. Huge numbers of fighting-age males have been killed or seriously wounded, and then they've lost a lot of territory in the eastern part of the country. Basically, the ethnically Russian part of the country has now been lost to Russia, and it's never coming back. Before this war, Ukraine already had a demographic problem. Their fertility rate was not at replacement level, and so its population was gradually declining over time. But now it's plummeted, and you can see that on this demographic chart where they already had the problem of too many old people relative to too many young people. Now there's a huge gouging out here of where all the young people should be. So how this country survives demographically, I think, is an open question. And on top of that, 12 million of the 28 million who remain in Ukraine are pensioners. They're not working age. So who's going to support all of those old people when all the young people have left the country or been killed and likely not coming back is really an open question. So this idea that American policy has helped Ukraine, it's really been a total disaster. I think it's really doomed the country. All right, so wrapping up here, where do we go from here? There's a new strategy that the Blob is promoting called Hold and Build. This is another narrative mirage. Somehow the idea is that we're going to hold Ukraine together and we're going to give them a whole bunch of munitions that we don't have, and they're going to rebuild their army with a bunch of men they don't have, and then they're going to come back in 2025. This is simply not going to happen, okay? What you're seeing every day now is that Russians are advancing. The Ukrainians, unfortunately, waited way too long to create defensive lines because, again, they put everything they had into their summer offensive. And unfortunately, it's way too late to be trying some sort of fully defensive strategy. It's pretty clear, I think, that and certainly all the experts that I listen to believe that it's only a matter of time before Ukraine loses this war. And the mainstream media is starting to recognize that fact as well. So what should we do here? Number one, we have to recognize reality. I think we massively underestimated Russia's strength. We relied on idiotic neocon cliches like Russia's just a gas station with nukes. The truth is that we don't want to believe this, or we don't like it, but Russia is a great power. It's a huge country, large population, a lot of natural resources, technologically stronger than we thought. And we need to be far more thoughtful, and certainly our foreign policy establishment needs to be far more thoughtful about violating other countries' red lines. If you're going to violate another country's red lines, you better make sure that you know exactly what the balance of power is. And we really underestimated, I think, Russia here. And so the first thing we have to do is just recognize the reality. Russia's not going to lose this war. They're going to finish it, and Ukraine's going to be destroyed. And so that leads to point number two, which is we really should cut a deal here on Ukraine before it's too late. If the war continues, the Russians are simply going to, the Ukrainians are going to lose more people. They're going to lose more territory. The Russians are going to take more land, and we really should cut a deal before it's too late. There's a corollary to the failure of the counteroffensive, which is if Ukraine can't take back territory, then the best they can do is lose less. And since there's no way for them to go, I think the counteroffensive proved that there's no way for them to take back territory. So the high water mark is getting worse basically every day, every week. We should have listened to Milley. We should have taken that deal in Istanbul. But the deal we'll get now is better than the deal we'll get 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. And while we're at it, I would also say that this would be a really good time to seek détente with Russia. There is simply no reason for us to basically be courting World War III with the Russians. We do not have any vital interests that are at odds with their vital interests. This is basically a manufactured conflict that I think really started with Russiagate, where somehow this fantasy was created that somehow Putin was controlling our elections. I think everyone here knows this is all nonsense, but somehow this Russiagate hoax has metastasized into a new Cold War with Russia. And I think that it's going to be hard to diffuse this, but I think that we could take steps to try and negotiate a new European security architecture, take their security concerns seriously, and work out a modus vivendi with Russia. We do not need to be in a Cold War with them. We certainly don't need to be in a hot war with them. And then finally, we should revamp our defense industrial base. I think this war has shown how hollowed out our manufacturing has become in this country, how deindustrialized we've become. And I think J.D. spoke to this as well. It's really quite astounding at how limited our ability is to produce the weapons of war and how expensive it's become to do that. That the procurement policy at the Pentagon is, we've known they've been failing audits for years, but we have to completely rethink all of this if we want to maintain our own great power status. And then finally, I would say as part of this, we need to bring startups into the defense industrial base and the military industrial complex. The only advantage we have against, let's say, the manufacturing power of, say, a China or even a Russia is being on the technological cutting edge. And if we have these five staid old defense companies dominating the military-industrial complex, we're not going to take advantage of all the startup innovation that's out there. So I hope we will realize that and reform our military-industrial complex and our defense spending before it's too late. Just want to close with this last thought. This is from Paul Kennedy, who wrote The Rise and Fall of Great Powers. He says that great powers need to be careful not to overextend themselves through military adventures. Basically, he says that hubris and basically overstretching yourselves are the Achilles heel of great powers. And I think that we should really take this seriously. History has shown us that there is no such thing as a permanent great power. Great powers rise and fall throughout history. But decline does not have to be our fate. We need to stop listening to the bipartisan cabal of warmongers who constantly call for our soldiers and our tax dollars be sent overseas in search of monsters to destroy and reinvigorate our own greatness back here at home. Thank you.
Hopefully you enjoyed that from David. We'll go next to Stephen K. Bannon, who has been an incredible friend to this organization for many, many years now. Steve doesn't ask anything. He just wants to see great conservatives succeed. He teaches for our kids all the time, and he's one of the most persecuted men in America. Look, I'll say this. I know I will have succeeded in life when I get a book written about me titled War for Eternity, which is the most metal name of a biography possible. Obviously, it was a terrible shit-lib book that was written about him, but man, he really scares the other side in a pretty unique way. Thank you, Steve, for always taking time for American Moment. We'll go now to Stephen K. Bannon.
Talk about the American moment, it's not great. You know, I don't have a lot to add from what Brother Han said, which was pretty stark, pretty realistic. But I want you to contemplate what's happening right now in this city, the greatest and most powerful nation in the history of the earth. What, about a mile up the road on Capitol Hill? It's a farce. It's a disgusting farce. And tomorrow, what's going to happen? Passing of a minibus or a maxi bus, whatever they call it, controlled by Republicans, controlled by people that you fought for and worked for. This is a nation right now that on the watch of this usurper in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue have planned, executed, and exacerbated a magnificent invasion of the country that they've done. And Mark Krikorian and his team, Todd Bensman in the crowd, day in and day out show you 10 million illegal alien invaders at a minimum just on their watch that have done what? According to Chairman Powell, they needed immigration to bring down wages because the underclass and the working class in this country, minority working class, they're making too much money. That's the problem, making too much money. So the radicals you talked about in these agencies and in this government, this illegitimate regime has allowed actually the worst event in the history of this country. Think of what our forefathers would think. Think of all your family, your grandfathers, your grandmothers, what they had to do to get here and what they had to do once they were here to make sure you're sitting here today. What would they say to us? What would they say to us about that? On top of it, the Republicans, we've just sat there and approved another budget of $7 trillion spending with a $2 to $2.5 trillion deficit. And it's going in perpetuity right now. Bank of America agrees with us. We talked about it months ago. It's $1 trillion every 100 days. And the only way you can keep it going is the scam of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury working together, hand in glove. On top of that, we got a geopolitical crisis on the rim of the Eurasian landmass. And I don't need to go into the detail that David Sachs went last night when he walked you through the Ukraine situation. But we also have the Red Sea, the Middle East, our ally Israel, and of course, the greatest threat, the existential threat, the CCP, which is in everywhere, and including now looking at the chimp plants in Taiwan, across the South China Sea and the Straits of Taiwan. Those converging crises is exactly why you're here. This is why the quality of people of David Sachs and Blake Masters and the other donors are here, because you have to be our savages. We're not going to change this thing by playing the game like we've played it. And the country is in a crisis, and now these crises are converging, and that's not even the cultural crisis. Look what Terry just talked about. What happens to your grandparents, your great-grandparents came back, and you had a conversation about what's happening there? They look at you like, what are you talking about? Look at what Han talked about the neo-Marxism in every institution and organization. And so we can't talk about it anymore. People know what the problem is. It's like in the movie The Untouchables. Remember, I don't know if you remember the scene, maybe the boomers do, with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. Thank you. They're sitting there and they're saying about the old cop and the new guy, and they're talking about, prohibition and the whiskey. And they go, everybody knows where the whiskey is. Do you have the political will to walk across the street and kick down the door and stop it? We ought to be humiliated by what's just going to be spin and talk and the cant that comes out of the mainstream media. And the Republican Party is nothing but controlled opposition. Johnson's proven that. I mean, McCarthy was worse. They did that debt deal. We're still living with this. But look at what's happening. This is not sustainable. It's not sustainable geopolitically. It's not sustainable culturally. It's certainly not sustainable financially. Society below us, the working class and the underclass, are starting to break apart. And when that breaks, we're going to have issues in this country that we never felt we were going to have, don't know how to deal with. The political class in this city cannot deal with the problems we face. This is why they hate Trump. Trump's not perfect. He's far from perfect. That he's an instrument of divine providence is no doubt in my mind, because I was there. I saw it. No money, no organization. A plane, a man, a message, and just go around, and people listened because he connects to them. And he shows you the multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition we can put together, particularly if we focus on the economics of it. We focus on economic nationalism, and we start to treat American citizens like they got a special deal. It's not just America first, it's American citizens first. But this is what American Moment is, and this is why I've been a huge supporter of this from day one, and this is why I come over and give the talks. Because there are not many people like the leadership of this organization. But more importantly, there's not many people like the young people that we're putting in on Capitol Hill into the committees, into the second Trump term. You can't just talk about deconstructing the administrative state. You have to do it. You have to take on the deep state. You have to do it. You have to be prepared to go to prison. I get prison sentences all over. Today, and I don't know if you saw it, today in Italy, after 5 years, and it cost me a couple of $1 million, we were acquitted of all criminal charges and civil charges. And by the way, the guy that was there, the guy, he's a guy like Navarro. Trump and I are built a little different than others, Rudy, etc. You're going to throw you in jail, you're going to throw you in jail, right? Bring it. Ben Harnwell and Peter Navarro, they're different. They're PhDs. This guy had every opportunity. I asked him, I said, if you want to throw in the towel, I don't want to do it, but we'll do it. He was facing long-term prison sentence in Italy. And you know what the crime was? You know what the crime was? That we had the audacity to take a monastery they put on auction, win the auction, that we could do anything and return it not to a hotel, not to a boutique, not to some spa. We were turning it to an academy of the Judeo-Christian West, built upon Jerusalem and Athens and Rome, and what that meant for the West. And build a gladiator school, not just a think tank, but something that would be like American Moment. You're doing it in a very narrow sector, but very important. People that are ready, trained up, have the intellectual and educational background to actually go into Capitol Hill today and make an impact. We were trying to do it a little more broadly, to take people, train them up in part one about what's the theory of the case. In part two, actually train them to be information age gladiators or legionnaires. And three, also have a physical aspect to it, so you could play this game at a high level for a long time. That was a crime to the deep state of Italy. The intelligence services came after us. The law enforcement came after us because they said, "Oh, this guy's just going to train populist nationalist people that can go in and have other Brexits or win the European parliamentary elections this June. You're damn right we were, and we are. They're playing for keeps. Our fines for, I forget whatever, is going to be tens of millions of dollars, and people are going to jail. Just like President Trump. Think about it for a second. 700 years in prison, take his business. See that trials like the Moscow show trials. I'm not kidding. When I say Trump is only the third in this country, you have General Washington, you have Abraham Lincoln, you have Donald Trump. Why? Only 3 times in this country's history, this republic's history, has the fate and destiny of an individual be inextricably linked to the fate and destiny of the republic. And Trump's, he's no constitutional scholar. He's not a particularly churchy guy. But I will tell you, he is an instrument of divine will. And it's upon you. You're the hoplites, right? You're the foot soldiers. This can't get changed just by a leader. We saw that in the first term. This is why Heritage and others, Russ Vogt's group, Sarab's working on it, training up people for what we call the, Project 2025, or whatever you call it, on the day that we hit the beach. Of the 4,000 people that will actually do the work inside the government, 3,000 can be a landing team and go in day one. Only Donald Trump has to approve them. 1,000 have to be Senate confirmed. And guess what? They may never be Senate confirmed or dragged out like Mitch McConnell dragged it out last time if Schumer's there. But we have 3,000 go right away. That is what you can be part of. That is how you deconstruct the administrative state. That's how you take down the deep state. And let me tell you something, just like in 16, of which I think I spent $2.5 or $3 million out of my pocket for the Russia, I spent more time, 60 hours, in front of Mueller, in front of the shifty shift in the House Intel, in front of Senate Intel, and they're grilling you for 60 hours. You know what they're trying to do? One slip up for a perjury trap, constantly, all the time, bang, 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 and they want to put you in jail. If you think that they're just going to sit there and pat us on the head and say, oh, this is terrific. Trump came back and he won and this is great. Why don't we just let MAGA, right? Why don't we just let MAGA? Why don't we let American Moment? Let those guys in here. Let them do what they want. This is not going to happen that way. It's not going to happen. Every successful revolution, every successful movement on earth has 2 things it has to have: spirit and willpower. Spirit and willpower. When Terry Schilling talks about those donations, the money they raised, that comes from people making $35,000, $40,000 a year. The War Room's audience is a working class, lower middle class audience. Yeah, we have hedge fund people and producers and everybody trying to find out what are they thinking? What are these MAGA people thinking? It's the little guy. But they understand now, because in this city, as you know, if you're not in the room, you're not in the deal. And Trump put them in the room and he put them at the head of the table. That's why they hate Trump. That's why they consider Trump a traitor to his class. But that we have tapped in, and you collectively, in this Trump movement, the MAGA movement, the greatest political power on the face of the earth right now. They are there. They're focused, and they want to win, but they want changes. No more happy talk, right? They know what has to happen in the country. Think about what's going on right here right now, tonight. They're going to call for immediate ceasefire in Gaza. They're going to dictate. They're hurting the Israelis every day. When they put in Parliament Square last week, when the Palestinians took over, the Sharia supremacists took over and put up on Big Ben from the river to the sea. That's not Israel. That's us. We are the Judeo-Christian West. We're one civilization. From time immemorial, for 5,000 years. Thomas Aquinas, to start it off, the monastery we had was 1,000 years old. At the beginning of the week is the 159th anniversary of Lincoln's second inaugural address. Read that, the greatest political speech in history. How it resonates with Old Testament themes. And we have a administration or regime made of mainly of progressives that are prepared to throw Israel under the bus. The pro-Palestinian movement in the United States of America is the most anti-American movement in the history of this country. And you think it's going to get better? It's not going to get better. And people want to look away. You know what? People want to look away just like they want to look away in England. They're afraid. They're physically afraid. They're afraid if they talk up, they'll be debanked. They're afraid they'll be deplatformed. They're afraid the jackboots and the Gestapo FBI are come beating down the door. Look how many people around Trump have prison sentences or jail. Look at Rudy. He's bankrupt. Look at this. Look at Trump. They're playing hardball. They're not prepared, and they will not give up control of the most powerful nation on earth unless we take it from them after we win an election. You young people, this is why you got the David Saxes and the Blake Masters, the quality people you have here, others that has contributed, all these great donors that have every option in the world to give money. Why Terry Schilling, a guy like that, has committed what he's done at American Principles. Why this organization, you have the quality of speakers you have to come over because you're curated. But the most important thing you have to have now, you have to have courage. Don't think some Trump victory is going to get us there. Some Trump victory is going to be the entry card into the real work. And the real work is taking this thing apart brick by brick. The national security state, the intelligence apparatus that's out of control, the biopharmaceutical industry that's out of control, complex that's out of control, this administrative state that is metastasizing every day. And remember, since we won in 2022, the budget they're working on, don't take any of the lies or any of the misrepresentation. It's Nancy Pelosi's budget plus $30 billion. And everything you talked about right there, every opportunity we had to take out the woke and weaponize, nothing came out. You had a few things on the margin, and that's it. And we had over a year to work on this. Why? They're afraid. They're afraid of being called racist. They're afraid of being called xenophobes. They're afraid of not being allowed in the clubs. They're afraid. It's you, as we get you into these positions, that have to be fearless and have to be risk takers, or it's over. If we just play by the rules, if we just go along this, if we're the controlled opposition that the Murdochs want us to be, remember, Fox has tapped this thing along for years. That's where the country couldn't have gotten the shape they were in unless the media arm was in on the fix, right? This is why they hate Trump. Think about it for a second. Trump goes to Mar-a-Lago. The memo from Murdoch says that the court, we found in the court, we're going to make him a non-person. This guy who just won the Republican nomination 2 nights ago, I think the earliest it's ever been really awarded, right, on Super Tuesday, did not do a live interview on Fox, I think, for 3 years. They wouldn't let him on because they're afraid of what he's going to say for 3 years. It's controlled opposition. And that's not going to get better. So my message to you is that the reason I think we're supporters is you're not the future. The future's now. When President Trump wins, we need shock troops to go in and to hit this. And on Capitol Hill, you're going to have to go in these committees. You're going to have to go into these staffs. And you're going to have to be the ones that are constantly pressing. You're going to have to be the one late at night to say, look, no offense, nothing's come out of this. We're playing the game. There are no cuts that have been made. On the afternoon of the 20th of January, 2023, you're going to have to do 2 things. One, you're going to start to have massive cuts to federal spending. You're going to have to do, before you get to entitlements, people that have worked all their lives and make $1,200 in Social Security and a little bit of Medicare are not going to sit there and just say, okay, go ahead, Chris Christie, go ahead, Nikki, give me some ideas and let's make some change. That's not going to happen. If you show them that you can make cuts in discretionary spending and meaningful cuts to get on some glide slope to a balanced budget like in 5 years, and all those cuts are going to be tough, including in defense, and at the same time, show that you're serious about taxing the wealthy, serious about it. Not what he's over there tonight. Oh, it's 25%. A year ago, he said the same thing. He's crushed the economics. He's crushed the underclass. He's crushed the working class. That's why they hate him. That's why the numbers are so terrible. Don't take it from me. Look at his approval economy. From those people, they hate him. He's made the wealthier than they've ever been. He's going to talk tonight. Oh, we're going to tax the rich. We're going to, it's all a con. The Democratic Party is essentially a bunch of billionaires, the credentializers, as you talked about, Terry, the credentializing class, the college students are all idiots and can't pay their loans back, and then an underclass. That's it. The middle class, the working class, essentially with us. Not all, because there are some social issues that we're separated on, but essentially in the economics, we're similar. This is why I said when they put me on the campaign, and Hillary Clinton came out and she goes, he's a racist, he's a xenophobe. And I told everybody, I said, calm down, take a deep breath. If she's going to go down this route and we stick to economic nationalism and bringing the jobs back and focus on working people, we've got this. And most importantly, we have it in Michigan, we have it in Wisconsin, and we have it in Pennsylvania. These people are with you, but they're going to want to see results. American Moment is about this moment we're in. We are on the precipice in the abyss of losing a civilization that's been around for 6,000 years? I want you to think about that. We could lose it all. If you see what's happening in France, you see what's happening in England, they can't even bring this topic up. They can't even talk about it. In France, the generals are saying they're heading to a civil war. It's not Russia's not the enemy. The Russian people, last time I looked, were our principal ally in World War II and lost 65 million people beating the Nazis and the fascists. It was the Bolsheviks and the Soviets. And then we turned it over to the KGB, just like we let Deng Xiaoping off the hook in Tiananmen Square. We sold these people out, Lao Baijing and the Russians, right after the war. And 49 for the Chinese, 45 for the Russians. We overarmed Stalin the last 2 years of the war. Even Churchill was complaining about it. And then 50 years later, Tiananmen Square and the Berlin Wall are 6 months apart. The Bush apparatus went and bailed out Deng. We had him on the ropes, got us a liberty right there, got us a democracy in Tiananmen Square. Gone. We turned it over to the CCP, just like the West went in and tried to steal as much as they could possibly steal from the Russian people even they allowed the KGB to come back. That's your elites in this country. And right now they've done it to the American people, and the American people are looking to you to make changes. So tonight, the only thing I ask for later, to think about that. There's 8 billion people in the world today? I think some statistics is 115, 120 billion people in the history of the earth. Homo sapiens before we get to Homo sapien plus, which is a whole nother issue we have to talk about later, right? Think about it for a second. Why has divine providence put you here? Why you're in this room? Why are you in an organization like this? Why do you have comrades like this? Why are you in an organization that has Blake Masters and David Sachs and these great donors and has Terry Schilling and Raheem Kassam and all these Vish Burrow and Cameron Wallace, all these young up-and-comers? They come here and they say, we want to back these people. Ask yourself why. Why, of all of that, did divine providence put you here in the American moment? Why? And then you answer the question, what is your responsibility? What is your accountability going to be? Because if you don't do it, he's right. There's no Calvary. There's nobody coming to back us up. This is it. So look around. And we only got Trump for one term. It's going to take 30 or 40 years to turn this thing around, and every day is going to be Stalingrad. The reason I love this organization and the leadership, they're tough, and I know you're tough. We got a long fight ahead, but I like the cut of your jib. So good luck and good hunting.
Hopefully you enjoyed that. We'll close things out with remarks from myself, but much more importantly, my friend Blake Masters, candidate for Congress in Arizona, former head of Teal Capital and co-author of 0 to 1. Blake has just been an incredible friend to our organization. He's a great role model and inspiration to a lot of young people who see him and the politics he espouses as a example of what it means to engage in public life in a way consonant with what this American moment needs. Thank you, Blake, for joining us. He's obviously very busy campaigning, so it meant a lot. He would take some time to come out and help celebrate our 3rd anniversary with us. And you can hear me sort of, punch drunk on the excitement of it all, talking as well. We'll go now to myself and Blake.
Sponsors of this event. We had a couple of goals when it came to this event, but one of them was to make sure that the financial obligations that came out of it did not injure our ability to do the rest of what we wanted to do this year. I will tell you that this entire gala is entirely paid for by our generous sponsors. I want to thank Mike Ryden, Andrew Antar, Proverbs Media Group, Conservative Partnership Institute, the Heritage Foundation, American Principles Project, Boyd and Gray and Associates, Crescent Metter, Targeted Victory, the Foundation for American Innovation, the Claremont Institute, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and the State Freedom Caucus Network. Thank you to every single one of you for making this a reality. I want to thank David, J.D., Mark Meadows, Theo Wold, Reverend Brito, and Blake, who's about to speak, for being a part of this program. Again, I found someone once said that the best organizations, the best initiatives, the best things done in this life are ultimately just an assemblage of the private obsessions of the people who put them together. I could not think of a better lineup of 6 people to have for the first event that American Moment hosted. What an incredible evening. Please give them a round of applause. Everything American Moment does, again, because I'm a moron, is because we have fantastic teachers who teach at our programs. This year, I think we will host over 300 educational seminars. If you have taught for American Moments programs, don't be shy. I need all of you to stand up, and I need everyone to give a giant round of applause for American Moments program educators. Come on, stand up. I see lots of people not standing up. Rachel, Sagar, Theo up here. Come on. Everyone stand up. There's a lot more. Everyone's being shy. There's like 50 people in here that have taught for American Moments programs. They are the reason this organization succeeds. And the other significant population in the room is the people who have gone through American Moments programs, which is basically everyone in this room in one way or another. We are extremely grateful that you guys, at least initially, choose to just take a leap and say, maybe this is a good hour to spend coming to lunch on Capitol Hill, or maybe I'll spend a summer coming and doing the Fellowship for American Statecraft. I know for a fact the statistics show that we have earned a lot more of your time after that first interaction than just that first one, and we are incredibly grateful for everyone who has chosen to take what is a risk, to choose to affiliate with us, to put these gears on your lapel pins, to go around Washington saying that, yeah, I know that Sarab kid, he's a little crazy and weird. Thank you for making this a reality, for making this worth doing every single day. This is, in a way, our 3rd anniversary party. On February 24th, 2021, we launched this organization with about 100 people at the Conservative Partnership Institute offices. And it was during COVID, or just as COVID was ending. And I remember a couple people who were in this room coming up to me and saying, DC's back. This party tells us that DC's back, and it might be better than ever before because there was an energy in that room. There's a couple people here. Congressman Jim Banks was the only congressman that was there. Where's Congressman Jim Banks? He was planning on coming for like 15 minutes, and he ended up staying for like 3 hours because he realized there was something really cool going on there. And a lot of you were there that night, and we're extraordinarily grateful. I did not know what was going to happen. There were cheapo screen-printed lapel pins out there. There was a terrible backdrop that like instantly caved after one afternoon. We didn't know if we'd have the resources to keep this organization going. We didn't know if we'd have a reason to exist. Again, we could all be doing better things. Collecting a paycheck via doing this work in Washington is not the best way to collect a paycheck. I promise you that. But it's been 3 years, and we have not only existed for its own sake, but we have had the impact that we wanted to. I always say that American Moment has a what and a why. The what is personnel. Most of this room is those people. These are the people that will change the American right over the next decade, 2 decades, 10 decades, because they're part of the 15,000. A couple of you have heard this shtick before. There's a couple thousand people who work for think tanks and parapolitical organizations in Washington, D.C. There are 4,500 people who work for House Republicans right now. There's 2,500 people that work for Senate Republicans. That goes up if we take back the majority. And when President Donald J. Trump wins the White House in November, there will be 4,800 people that will be made political appointees to go work for him in the administration. This task ahead of us, governing the United States of America from an authentic America First conservative perspective, is a conspiracy of 15,000 people. That is a legible number. The people in this room are a meaningful percentage of those 15,000 people. American Moment will bring hundreds of people for every year that we exist to put a dent in that 15,000. And within a decade, you will look around and see a meaningful portion of those, maybe even over half, that can be credited to the work that we've done, building a personnel pipeline that brings serious, capable people to Washington, D.C. That's the what, but what's the why? I'm not interested in creating the next generation of, Republican staffer bros that get trashed at mission and believe nothing. At the end of the day, the task of building a personnel pipeline was how we saw we could impact the America First worldview we wanted to see implemented in American life. The America First worldview that has as part of it a foreign policy that prioritizes realism and restraint, the ideas that David talked about, that says that America is not some open-air bazaar to sell off to the highest bidder, mainly China, on trade, that says that immigration is a serious issue and it's time we shut down the border once and for all. A perspective that says that tech monopolies don't get to run this country and that our culture, the American culture, is worth preserving, and golly gee, we have a role here in Washington to help do that. That's the what and the why. And we have made real progress that I can go to bed at night and wake up in the morning early to come to work and continue to advance, because it's the greatest thing in the world. I chose to get an apartment right by our office on Capitol Hill. I walk, 12 and a half minutes to the office every morning when I'm not feeling lazy and take an Uber instead. And I walk past people that are on their way to Capitol Hill or to a think tank that we brought to DC that would tell me that they are only here because of us. I'm not really interested in taking credit. Many of you have been placed by American Moment. I'll run into at a party and you'll say something like to a mutual friend, you'll say, "Oh yeah, Sarab brought me here." I'm like, "Don't say that. Like, you just do great stuff. Like, we don't need the credit." Thankfully, our supporters give us the credit for it. But that is what vivifies me. I know it vivifies our team, is being able to look at the material texture of the crowds you see in DC and see, oh, that's one of ours, that's one of ours, that's one of ours, that's one of ours. I don't have kids. The rest of our team has some. So I see everyone American Moment has brought to Washington as our children, and it couldn't happen soon enough. Look, we had this luxury, which is we had the idea for this organization in 2020. And it's now very sexy to talk about personnel being policy, and there's a lot of work being done to transition in 2025. We're involved with basically every single one of those projects, and we're extraordinarily grateful. But we were very lucky that we had the time in like 2020, 2021, 2022, when fewer people were paying attention, to really do good work and build up the infrastructure that we needed to. But 2024 is here. Part of the reason we did this event is because I really can't focus on fundraising for the second half of this year. We're going to be heads down in the office, making sure that we are prepared, and we will be prepared. I promise you that if President Trump wins the election in November, that there will be a serious number of American Moment brought personnel in that administration helping implement his agenda. I said, if we were hit by a bus in that video that played earlier, I talk about bus-proofing American Moment all the time. Slightly less antisocial people than I tell me that's a bit macabre. I don't care. Because I constantly wonder, again, these buses on Pennsylvania Avenue, they just go by like this. It scares the crap out of you. And so I sometimes wonder what would happen if, our entire team was lost in a terrible plane accident. It's not going to happen. Nick doesn't fly anywhere. We would still succeed because the population of people that have been brought to Washington through our programs are going to be here for the long haul. They're going to hire like for like, and they're going to be some of the most impactful people in all of Washington. I know that for a fact. So in some ways we've won, which is great. Our kids are already pretty senior staffers, all things considered. We've created, just out of our fellowship programs, comms directors, legislative directors, district directors, all but chiefs basically on the Hill. And I promise you, there will be chiefs within short order. But we're not going to get hit by a bus, and this American Moment is not going to be shuttered in the next couple of months after the presidential election is done either. We're here to stay. Because what we've discovered is that there is a role for this organization in the long term, one that is not tethered to any presidential cycle. It's not tethered to any congressional cycle. At the end of the day, no one's better at bringing talented, capable, America First conservatives to Washington than we are. And the task of what we might be good at is expanding. We're constantly adding new programs based on ideas that many of you have brought to us, ideas for advanced policy programming, or hey, maybe your staff should come together for a coalition meeting to influence this issue area, or whatever it might be. One of those partnership opportunities is what we're doing with National Conservatism Conference. One of the hats that I wear now, because I need more work, like I need a bullet in my head, is the executive director of National Conservatism Conference. We're hosting a conference in Brussels in just under 2 months, and we will host a National Conservatism Conference in Washington, D.C. this summer, and it's going to be the best one yet. So here's my promise to you guys. We're going to keep working hard. We're going to spend the money extremely diligently. We're not going to give ourselves a reasonable schedule. And we are going to continue to innovate on every single idea we bring to you guys. And you guys are going to tell us that we're doing something stupidly, and I'm going to agree, and we're going to amend it and edit it, and we're going to do it better. That's partially why we've invited the people that we invited into this room tonight, because you are the people that we look to for advice on what to do and how to do it. But I firmly believe that we will win. And we is not just American Moment, it's not our team, it's this group of people and what this group of people represents. When I'm feeling my most dramatic, I say the following thing, that the ground in this age is littered with crowns and swords, but purely a dearth of men and women willing to pick them up and use them. Well, we're fixing that dearth. Every single person in this room is someone that if I could hand a crown and a sword, I would, and say, let's charge into battle and let's do the things that need to be done to save this country. We will win, and it's going to be thanks to every single person in this room. Thank you for all of your help. I get to make one more introduction tonight to toast for the evening. Someone who I consider a real close personal friend, who has made Tucson, Arizona one of the great destinations in my life that I like to visit. Blake Masters is a candidate for the Republican nomination to represent Arizona's 8th congressional district. He was the Republican Party nominee in the 2022 United States Senate election in Arizona. He was previously the chief operating officer of the Thiel Capital and president of the Thiel Foundation. He is the co-author of 0 to 1 Notes on Startups and How to Build the Future with Peter Thiel. He is a dear friend of this organization and will close out the night. Please welcome Blake Master.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's awesome to be among so many friends of American Moment. I have to confess, I wasn't always so friendly to the organization. I remember being very skeptical. In fact, I'm not sure if I ever told you, Sir, just how skeptical I was. So a couple years ago, out of the blue, I get a call from my friend J.D. Vance. And, hey, how you doing? How you been? Okay. So I got this guy I need you to meet. His name's Sarab, and he's really cool. I say, okay, great. What's he working on? And J.D. told me. And there was a long silence. And J.D. said, I know, man, it sounds crazy. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds crazy. They want to, read it back to me again, they want to take over the government by training up an army of young staffers to go and throw them into all these Capitol Hill positions. And J.D. said, precisely. But trust me on this one. So I was very skeptical. I'm running for Congress now, but my background is in venture capital and philanthropy. So I'm used to receiving lots of pitches, including lots of bad pitches. And I thought this might be one. But when J.D. Vance comes and says to you, hey, trust me on this, okay, you do it. So yeah, please introduce us. And I think J.D. connected us via text. And I confess I was not responsive via text. This is a little trick. Maybe it's to excuse my own laziness, but it's a little venture capital trick I learned too. Just, when you get a cold intro like this, or it's warm from JD, but Sarab was not known to me, I decided to just see how he would play it. And I was unresponsive, and, sometimes people just, they'll text you once, hey, you want to set up, 5-minute coffee or whatever? You ignore that, and sometimes they just go away. And you're like, man, you must not be a good entrepreneur. Or how are you going to be a good nonprofit fundraiser if you just squander the opportunity? So Sarab didn't do that. If you know him, you know he's very persistent. And he was very persistent. I think I ignored 2 or 3 texts, but you can be persistent in a very annoying way, where you don't understand the etiquette of email or text, or you can be persistent in sort of a dogged entrepreneurial way. And I have to say you were. You were very persistent. You wouldn't stop until you got an hour on the phone with me. But I also came away from it liking you. And that's really rare in the business. So I set up a 15-minute conversation with Sarab, and it turned into an hour. And I think we had another one the following day. And then he came out to see me in Los Angeles at the time. And I was basically sold. I was sold on the vision, as crazy as it sounded. And so I was happy to arrange some seed capital, right? I think we gave you enough to get off the ground and go for a year or 2. But then if you remember, I was very clear on this. This is a one-time thing, right? Sometimes in a for-profit context, when you invest in a company, you give them seed capital, you really want them to grow and hit their milestones, but then attract a different investor for the Series A, right? You don't want them to just be dependent. And this is especially a problem in the nonprofit context. So many people, you give them a nonprofit check, and then 2 years later, they're back and they're saying, hey, we need... this organization is going to close if you don't help us. And I warned you in advance, this is a one-time thing. And Sarab, like everybody, said, oh yeah, I get it. But unlike everybody, he actually went out and executed and did what he said he was going to do. He built this fantastic donor base. Probably half the people in this room are donors to American Moment. You've seen in the organization what I saw in it, and you've done a phenomenal job. You really have. I know that's too financial a cut on it. And I only give that intro because that's how I met Sarab and American Moment. Of course, getting revenue into any organization, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, it's the lifeblood of an organization. But the revenue only matters to the extent the organization is doing good work, right? And so you've been a successful fundraiser, but what's the money done? Well, it's done so much. It's done so much more than I would have thought possible 3 years ago. Truly. And there's a quantitative cut on this, right? You could talk about how many fellows have gone through the program. You could talk about the hundreds of seminars you've had. I actually think if you want to be impressed by quantitative metrics, Sarab's totally right, where you ain't seen nothing yet, right? When Trump wins in November, I fully expect American Moment is going to be there ready to staff hundreds, if not thousands, of administration positions. It's going to be really, really breathtaking. But I prefer, absolutely, thank you. I think even more impressive than the quantitative output this number of staffers hired and all that. It's sort of the qualitative dimension of what you're doing. And it's still early days, and you conceded that. But to have an organization that is as young and as hungry, right, as American Moment, where you're trying to really change the culture and build a community here in D.C. And I hate to hear myself use the word community because it's so hackneyed, right? It's so overused. But I think maybe it's so overused precisely because we're suffering from this lack of community, right? And you're building this organization of young people who are mission aligned, and you're really trying to change the ethos of the town. And I think, I dare say you're going to succeed at it. So it's an honor to be a friend of the organization and play some small role. I'm really proud of you guys. And as we look to the future, I'd offer a toast to American Moment if you want to raise up your water glass or if you've got some wine or coffee. To this amazing organization and to everybody who's worked hard to make it happen, may your continued efforts just continue to revitalize and restore our great nation. So here's to American Moment. Thank you. I would also be remiss not to mention, we've rented out the whole downstairs, right? Was it the Dirty Habit Bar? And the tab is on Sarab. So go and enjoy it responsibly. Thank you, guys.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We certainly enjoyed putting on the event. Thank you again to the sponsors of that event, ranging from Mike Ryden, Andrew Antar, Proverbs Media Group, the Heritage Foundation, the Conservative Partnership Institute, Boyd & Gray & Associates, Crescent Metter, American Principles Project, Claremont Institute, who else am I forgetting? The Foundation for American Innovation, State Freedom Caucus Network, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple more, but thank you to all the sponsors for helping put that event on. If you are motivated to send us some money, as many people were from that event, we had a very nice financial bump from all of that. Please go to AmericanMoment.org/donate. Be sure to rate and review this podcast, become a member on YouTube to get these episodes early, and be sure to tune in, as always, next week for yet another episode. Thank you guys for listening. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.